Hello and welcome to the Senteon CIS webinar series. We got special guest Matthew Fish joining us today. I
Hey
do not
guys.
think Rich is making it, but in Rich's place, we do have Bruno, my cat, who has decided today's the day he's going to sit in my arms, and he has not moved in 4 minutes now, Matt?
Maybe more.
I have no idea. He never sits in my arms, and I guess I'm just going to carry a small child during this webinar today, but that is a-okay. So, today's episode was intended to be the season finale of Microsoft Edge, but due to IT Nation being last week, we did reschedule that one. So we have one more week of incredible settings to talk about after this one. And then we'll be getting into the wonderful world of Firefox hardening. So that'll be kicking off for 2025. Man, we're almost at the end of the year, man.
So, you just gonna leave like 5 weeks empty?
Dude, I mean, we can do some extra webinars if you want. You have anything about CIS you can talk about?
Well, I'll think about it.
You're not the
I have some
CIS guy
ideas.
or anything,
I
are
have
you?
some ideas. I don't want to commit.
Too funny. But per usual, I'm going to kick off just with a quick high level of Senteon. So we've tossed the screen up, some recent news. We did attend IT Nation. We were part of Pitch It this year, and we were lucky enough to take home that grand prize. And we have the jumbo check in my background today, if you haven't seen it. But we competed against a couple other companies, and we fortunately came out with the win. So outside of that, Senteon is hardening workstations, servers, and browsers to the CIS standards. So these episodes are all recorded, and you can check them out on our website. You can see them here. And if you wanted to, you can click this login button and you can kick off a free trial or just use our freemium package. All of that is available. And if you do, let us know you watch the Senteon webinar. We will be giving out free reporting to our guests. But this is the freemium example. So you can see all of the CIS recommendations and where they fit across other frameworks. That's the really cool thing here, because meeting CIS is one thing, proving the other regulatory crosswalks is the other thing. You can also click into any of these settings. They will give you the explanation of what they are, why they matter, and the machine key, and all of the good old crosswalk information that you may wish and hope for. We also have a partnership with Fort Mesa here today, so we could talk about that in a little bit as well. And like I said about the free reporting, you can get this report right here to know where your policies sit with CIS, and you can have a free gap assessment of your environment simply for watching the webinar. Just let me know you watched it, and we'll give you, I think it's like 100 free assessments, internal and external. So you can see all of your non-compliant gaps. And if you really want to put Senteon to the test, ask us to remediate the settings. So we will actually perform the remediation. We turn red marks green, or in this case, red marks blue, which is the same as green. And you can see all of the crosswalks now compliant and everything else that goes with it. All right, that's been 3 minutes of the Senteon highlight. That wasn't even 3 minutes, man. The solution is so much cooler than the 1 minute and a half I gave it. But anywho, we're here for the webinar series with Matt Fish. Welcome, brother.
I gotta tell a short little story about the green versus blue thing there that you were just. So I'm sitting in. This is a few years back. We went through a startup accelerator. I'm sitting in this marketing workshop, and the person at the front of the room says, "Does everyone know what the color of security is?"
Oh,
And
God.
like, I don't remember what I said, but I definitely did not get it right. And everyone else in the room said blue, and I'm like, blue?
Was this like blue team was the answer, or
No, blue's the color of security.
blue's just the color of security? Hey, man, I would have got it
And
wrong myself.
I'm thinking like red, like alerts, or like green, good, like trust. And it's no blue, like a blue, like uniform, like I now I know. Now I know. Blue's
well,
good.
well, speaking of accelerators, like I shared, I went through Pitch It. I know you were a contestant last year. Before we
Yeah.
get into kind of the accelerators and the benefit and the takeaways, tell us a little bit about Fort Mesa. What are you guys building over there?
So it's fun that we get to brush shoulders in the market here. We also support service providers. Um, our mission is really to enable service providers to be able to deliver that total security solution, that security architecture across any security standard. So
Okay.
where you guys drill super deep into endpoint and some software hardening, browser hardening, we're
Yep.
going to talk about today.
Yep.
We're looking more holistically at the whole security standard, including
Okay.
things like personnel controls, governance,
Is
all
this
the
like a GRC
ops.
platform, or
Yeah,
what
yeah, we do.
category do you fall into?
We do fall into the GRC category, but I don't emphasize that because the reality is, if you look at GRC products, what you see a lot of are assessment products for building reports. And I think that, particularly in the service provider segment, that whole security solution starts before that. I think, I think service providers need to explain to their customers what security they have and what they need, be successful with that sale, and then project manage it all. And
Yep.
then GRC is sort of like the end state, right? The proof. The proof is in the evidencing, and so we're definitely in that GRC category, but we like to think of ourselves as like full spectrum champions of that total
Okay.
package.
So just like us, how you partner with us, you're helping MSPs evangelize their security stack to kind of prove that roadmap of implementation all the way to the output.
Yeah, the stack, but also their people, right? Because a lot of security. I mean, you can't. Unfortunately, we do not yet have the agent that installs into the brain to harden the
Oh,
people, but we
wouldn't that be
can.
nice? I think
There
Elon
are
Musk might
things.
have something for that soon enough.
There are things we can do on that side, so we're also in that space as well.
Very cool. And being entrepreneurs, just like myself, yourself, and many of our peers, we've gone through accelerators. So I can't imagine this was your first pivot. Maybe if it was, like, kudos to you, man. You're one in a million. But tell us a little bit about like what accelerators you've really been into and takeaways, and especially highlight Pitch It if you don't mind.
Yeah, so Pitch It came sort of recently, which was a really awesome experience in the ConnectWise ecosystem, and really the service provider ecosystem in general. But we launched out of Mach 37 right at the beginning of COVID, and Mach 37 at that time was uh, really the only cybersecurity software accelerator.
Sure.
Um, and they're down in DC area. So a lot of brand names you might be familiar with, or our audience might be familiar with, went through Mach 37, including
Awesome.
names like Huntress, were our alums.
Super cool.
So we went through that program, super great, super interesting. Learned a lot about how to sell to the federal government. Learned that I didn't particularly want to sell this to the to the federal government, and
Well,
and
oops.
pivoted and decided, what, service providers that are securing small and medium sized businesses, that was a space I could get behind. Right, it's the one place in cybersecurity where you're, rather than stopping losses, which is you're also doing, you're creating value, right?
Yep.
So, which is, if people watching aren't in sales, maybe they don't get that. But I think it's super important that when you unveil the security solution, rather than people thinking about like lack of loss, they're thinking about gain, and it's a fun place in cybersecurity, right?
That's awesome.
Um,
And those
so
helped you perform those pivots and identify the appropriate market
Oh yeah.
position.
So I mean, we went through it, that accelerated idea stage, but then we experimented and frankly fell on our face a little bit,
That's how it
learning to
goes,
build a
man. That's
channel.
the real entrepreneur story.
Yeah, well, building the product, was not that it was easy, right? But it was easier than building the channel, and operating a channel, being top a channel, being able to support our providers at scale. And so when we joined Pitch It, um, that was, we were really honing our channel pitch at that moment in time. But that was a fun introduction,
That's
to get
awesome.
to compare to lots of other vendors and sort of peek inside behind the curtain inside their operations. And I'm sure you have similar thoughts about that
Oh, it
that
was
experience.
definitely a great experience too. And getting to go to IT Nation. This was my first time, right? Senteon is now starting to go to these shows, planning to be at Ride a Boom and so forth. So very much thankful for the opportunity, and that kind of helped us as early stage people just figure out what the hell is the channel and how do we be successful. So awesome to share that with you, man. But let's hop into some of these settings. We do have a shorter episode because this was intended to be the season finale. So there's not a ton of settings today. I think there's only 8. So we might have some more topics to talk about towards the end of today. But let's go ahead and hop on into these settings. So the first one here, oh, cool, we got it pulled up. Get that slide. So ensure standalone sidebar enabled is set to disabled because we love the way Microsoft names their GPOs so that the word is in the actual sentence and it is literally a opposite of what you thought it would be. So again, these CIS benchmarks are focusing on Microsoft Edge, and these recommendations and these settings are either going to be typically will be cross-mapped to the controls. This one, for example, is not actually mapped. I know that's something Matt Lee has talked about, getting all of the benchmarks to crosswalk, which is nice. And then in the bottom right is the levels. So levels, level 1 is something every business should be doing. And level 2 is the ones that are a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more disruptive, and to use more caution with. But regarding the first setting here, Matt, why do we not want a standalone sidebar? This doesn't sound that bad.
Well, I know that. Well, first of all, I think it's really great that this setting even exists because when you go through the school of security theory, this is drilled into you over and over again. That you don't want to train users to. You don't want to shut down their critical thinking. You don't want to make it
Okay.
harder for them to act critically. So the description here is to be less distracting, but it sounds less important than it is, right? Um, when there's more information cluttering a screen, people are less likely to absorb it. And in
Yep.
addition to that, we're training users to like react to the sidebar as if it's part of their operating environment. And then if someone sticks something in that location, the users may trust it more than they should. So there's a bunch of reasons not to do that. But
Yes.
I think in addition to the fact that who the heck needs a sidebar, right? Like
Yeah, there's definitely not a real business case for a standalone sidebar, but I love what you said there, and I do. I mean, I'm the one who wrote that, right? The distraction. I very much agree with that there. To where, for example, I loved how you said the operating system, it becomes part of it, right? If I have a backpack and that backpack has 100 pockets, it's absolutely phenomenal. I can put anything in there, but I only use 3 of the pockets. I may forget which of those pockets I actually need, and I start searching through. It takes more time. I'm using areas of that operating systems or areas of that backpack that I don't actually need, right? And it's just causing me to work a little bit slower. And then to your security point, if I already trust all 100 of those pockets, and there's randomly something in one of those pockets, I'm going to assume the business put it there. I'm going to assume it's already mine. I put it there. I just forgot. And it could be something more malicious, that could be taken advantage of. So spot on right there. And let's talk a little bit about how you mentioned, it kind of sounded like you were talking about the policies actually reinforce the end client behavior. Is that like, you think
there
policy kind of incorporate to the security culture?
what's really neat about that setting is usually in security theory, we discuss these from an engineering perspective. Like it's bad to build a system that leads the user to X, Y, or Z. So here's an example. For a really long time, email verification has been via links in your mailbox,
Sure.
right? It's like
Yep.
we create a user account, the email gets sent, the user is supposed to click there to validate their email. I It's literally been like 15 or 20 years that security experts have been saying, don't do that. You're training the user to click on
To click
links in their
things.
email. And then at the same time, you're telling them, don't click on links in their email. And the solution is, and we're starting to see this on some sites, right? Which is you get the verification email and now it's a number.
Yep.
And you have to take that number from your email and you have to type it into a trusted place. And users are probably like, what the hell? Why can't I just click this? But it's because you should not be
It's
clicking
2
links that
extra
come into
clicks,
your
Matt.
email. um, but this is that it's in that category of from a design philosophy standpoint, this is a really bad thing, right? I'm
Yep.
sure some person in marketing world was like, oh, we can steal some
This will be so
real
helpful.
estate. We could steal some screen real estate and like put Microsoft products here and feature them, right? And that's going to like increase engagement with Microsoft products. But the reality is it's training the user to like do some bad behavior, shut down critical
Yep.
thinking about like stuff appearing on the side of the screen, and That's
Now,
not what we want
this
to be doing.
cybersecurity theory you keep on bringing up. Tell us a little bit about your background. Is this like a college course you took? Like, obviously, you built Fort
Uh,
Mesa. You're the CEO and founder, but
well,
where is this logic coming
uh,
from?
yeah, I mean, I started a security practice. I used to work with MSPs.
Hmm.
Started a security practice, advisory related. Had a small team that did implementations, and that was just before Fort Mesa. Toward the end of my security practice tenure, sought out my CISSP. Um, Studied and passed that in 2 weeks, which I don't recommend to anyone. That was like the dumbest
No.
thing ever. Where I scheduled the test before taking a practice exam. Don't do that. Um, yeah, I just had to like drop everything and study because there was no way I was going to pass. But I was able to pass. But that wasn't the end of my journey because CISSP, in terms of expert level credential in cybersecurity, is sort of like table stakes, right? Um, if you want to be considered for those leadership positions in cybersecurity, it's a good way of saying you've achieved that common body of knowledge is what they call it.
Yep.
But it's really the beginning of a leadership journey, and there's a lot of other great sources of security theory that you can go deeper than that. There's some really great books out there. My favorites from Ross Anderson, who wrote he's passed now, but he wrote 3 editions of Security Engineering. And what's particularly interesting about that book was all of the you'd read like an edition from 10 years ago, and it describes all these things that if you fast forward, they all happened. Like he predicted all the major security
The
breaches.
writing's
Just
on the wall. We talk about it every day with AI. Like the writing is there. It's all
yeah,
coming.
yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of psychology involved here, and that psychology should be applied into how you design a secure system, and it manifests in areas of, hey, the window should be clutter free because you don't want to train your user to be distracted. You want them to focus on content. You want to be consistent in when they're making security decisions, etc. And so, things like the sidebar are a bad idea in security
Yep.
world, but it's not bad to have a sidebar. It's bad to invent a new UX concept, right? That's taking up screen real estate that they're not used to and don't realize like what's part of the sidebar, what's not part of the sidebar. Like that's a bad idea. People have already been trained for 30 years on top bars. Um,
Yep.
so
Absolutely. If you don't need it, if it's not adding that much value, why have it, right? It's all about reducing the attack surface with these settings we talk about. Reducing the attack surface or reducing the distraction surface. Trademark that
yeah.
one. All right, let's hop into this next setting here. So I think it's a suggests similar pages when a web page can't be found is set to disabled. So is this like maybe I do a little typo in the URL and it's like maybe you're thinking of this, but those suggestions can sometimes be bad. Why
Uh,
don't I want these suggestions?
well, I I'm just like itching about this one. Okay, so it was like both exciting and really distressing when I think Google was the first one on the block with this. You start typing into your search bar,
Yeah.
right? And it starts like searching stuff all over the internet, which basically means whatever's going into your address bar is going straight out to Google and or out to an attacker because maybe it's not even going out to Google. Maybe someone's intercepting that traffic, right?
Yep.
But in this case, if the website's not found, you have to wonder if what was put in that box was actually what was intended to be put in that box. Like, did someone just paste a password into their address box
Yep.
and press enter, and now we've just beamed that out into a search land? In addition to that, you end up with if the address wasn't exactly right and the user got it wrong, do we want to redirect to like a random website? And I mean, people were typo squatting for many years, right? And that's it's
Had a
really
whole
like
episode on that too.
it's still a problem today. It's less
Yep.
of a problem, but it's still a problem today. And this is like a feature where let's intentionally make it easier to typo squat. Like sounds like a horrible idea.
Yep.
So
The examples you provided here kind of make me think when I toss in my Google Maps or something, take me to this destination and it goes, destination is closed. If instead of it telling me where I wanted my destination was closed, it just takes me to the similar option that's still open without even telling me. No need for that. Could be in a back
Yeah,
alley, could be in a bad area. I'm not trying to go somewhere else. I want to go to the place. If it's closed, just tell me it's
yeah,
closed. I don't need to
yeah.
be redirected. Perfect. All right, let's go to this next setting here. So suppress the unsupported OS warning is set to disabled. I feel like whenever there's a warning or an alert, probably shouldn't be hiding this, as CIS has this set to disabled, saying, please acknowledge this. Please let the user know that this is happening. Why is this important to acknowledge and actually have the alert pop up?
Well, I want to say that this one, unfortunately, is not something that you can do in vacuum. So it's tempting to, as we said earlier, declutter the user environment,
Yep.
right? Um, and actually, this is a bit of a problem, right? Because it's less common than it used to be, but there's websites out there that like you go to the website and it says like fake error warning, you need to download this evil program or you need to fall for this help desk
Need to
scam,
use Internet
right?
Explorer. Those are
Yeah,
my
yeah,
favorite
yeah, yeah.
websites.
But this is a real issue. Someone needs to know when their device is out of date. But in addition to this, this isn't enough because you actually need to be training your users. So you should be
That is the
training them.
psychology side of this. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to train them. There's a series of alerts and there's a series of training that all needs to happen around training users to recognize when their browser's out of date, when their operating system's out of date, when they're not getting
Yep.
antivirus updates. This is actually something that it's recommended that every single user in an enterprise is trained on. And this warning is the thing that they're supposed to recognize, right? So it's their job to keep themselves up to date.
Yep.
Or if you think, oh, I'm a great admin, I automatically deploy updates, right? It's also their job to recognize, wait, my great admin usually takes care of my updates, but they're not happening.
Something's
Something
going
weird's going
on.
on. I
Hmm.
need to raise my hand. And that's actually what we need to do. We need to train the users to do that. But if we take the warning away, they can't do their job, which is to raise their hands when something is up.
I mean, it sounds like you take a very holistic approach to security, right? Obviously, these policies are in place to guide the end users who aren't fully aware, but at the same time, there are areas where these policies encourage them to raise their hand and interact with the security team and submit that ticket or at least send an email. So, what's your point of view? Like, is it holistic? Is this everybody's job to really help with security, or is it just that one man
Well,
behind the screen handling security?
my personal opinion is security is 2/3 people.
Yep.
And I'm a tech vendor. You guys are a tech vendor. Unfortunately, it's only 1/3 tech vendor. Um, but it's 2/3 people, and in probably equal parts, it's your IT or your security team doing their part, which is super sophisticated, right? But then it's the users that need to do their job. Um,
Yep.
and everyone needs to be doing their part, right? The technology needs to be doing its part. The administrators or the technology or security teams need to be doing their part, and the users need to be doing their part. And really, if any of those things fail, your security system breaks, right? Your
There's a massive
security's not
hole,
intact.
right? That
Yeah,
defense in depth, one of those layers failed. And, in a worst case scenario, two, three, four of those layers failed, right?
yeah.
So very much having those in place. I have the same sentiment as you. 2/3 though, man. It sounds like we're attacking the wrong market. We should be targeting the greater 2/3.
If only we could ship little shrink wrapped like perfect users. That would that would be a great business.
I love it. All right, let's go to this next one here. So, tab services are enabled, which we want to disable. I honestly didn't even know what the heck a tab service was until I made this slide. This is a level 2 setting as well as a heads up. So this very much could be something that people are used to seeing, used to using. So turning this off without notifying your employees or your clients, this might be something you get tickets about saying, hey, I can't do this the way I did it yesterday. But Matt, tell us a little bit about tab services. Were you
Uh,
familiar with this one?
you stumped me on this one.
Yeah, this one was random. I saw this one. I made the slide. I was like, okay, now I
All
know a
right.
little bit.
Zach and I are talking in the green room, and I'm like, well, I'm not super familiar with the insides of Microsoft Edge. And this is one of those things. I can vaguely understand what this is, and Google's got a similar feature set, but I'm not sure. I would presume the reason why you want to remove it is to force the system into a single context, but I'm not sure
Yeah.
about this.
It's literally another distraction thing to remove just viewable buttons. Just
Okay.
really just doesn't allow you to manage like the additional services of a tab. You can't, I don't have examples offhand, but it's literally just like that, right? I think it's just like the right click to so that you can do additional things other than close
But
that tab.
I'm wondering if it actually freezes the processing of
Mm,
code in a tab
the background app refresh,
when it's
maybe.
hidden. Yeah, which would have a security implication. But this is like we're in pure speculation land, so I don't know.
Well,
But if it's on the CIS L2 list, this would be appropriate for organizations that are looking to either secure a core enclave. So this is not for normal security deployments. Even companies that say I want to be really secure. This would
yep,
be for example, if you are contracting to a federal agency and you need to create a CUI enclave, this would be applied inside that enclave.
yep. Absolutely. Spot on. So let's look at this next one here. This one gets a little bit more straightforward here with text prediction enabled by default, which I just, I probably say this 2 or 3 times every episode. Like the standardization of just GPO names, like, why the other ones earlier in the episode, topic X enabled. Why does this one say enabled by default in the setting name? Like just keep the same freaking pattern.
The double negatives are drive me.
Yeah.
It's just not unique to Microsoft. This is like
No,
everywhere
this is
technology
very
went.
normal. So this
Yeah.
one here, CIS, as you can tell, literally by the verbatim in the name is enabled by default, which is just unnecessary text Microsoft wrote. But CIS does recommend to disable text prediction. Anything that is guessing what's coming up, that means it's learning about me, learning about my behaviors, can probably be taken advantage of by a bad guy. But prediction, Matt, what do you think?
Well, wait, I talked about this earlier. In the same reason why if you went to like a if you got redirected to a different server because of what got typed into that box, right? Using beaming like anything random you type into a box out to Microsoft is something that you wouldn't want to do unless you can guarantee the security of where that data is going. And I think that and what data should be going out there, right?
Yeah,
So I think that this will both encourage people to create secure architectures. Like, for example, well, maybe we should put a bookmark. We should program a bookmark in. If the
sure.
users are complaining they can't remember the URL, maybe we should be doing company bookmarks, right? Which would make sure that they always land in the right website.
Sounds like you're
And that's
describing a complementary control if you choose
yeah,
to harden this setting.
yeah, but also I think that we're gonna see like this text prediction thing. This was like a small problem before, but this is turning into a humongous problem with the advent of all those LLM features. I just
Yep.
updated I use a Chromebook, right, as like an uncrackable secure desktop. That's what I'm on right now. And I just upgraded to version 130 and Gemini's embedded in the thing. And I'm like, ugh, I got to go figure out how to turn that off. Uh,
Eh,
because, whether it's OpenAI or Gemini or whatever your LLM is, if you don't have a contract with that AI company, and and the terms of that contract and the configuration of that service specifically says I will not use this data for training, the default is they're going to use that for training. And guess
Yep.
what they're going to begin to do with all this prediction data? It's going to go straight into those LLMs, right? Which basically means you just dumped it onto the public web. So
Yep.
this was a small problem before because the data was being sent to question mark, and I think it's going to become a great problem because we know where the data is going. It's training
Yep.
data.
Yeah, no, that's
So
absolutely right. I mean, a lot of these settings are built to protect just from mistakes. Like it's not like the malicious client was trying to go somewhere. It was like, oh yeah, it autofilled. I assumed it was taking me there. And then yeah, bad actor LLM assumed the wrong thing and now you're on some other site you didn't want to be at, right? You're somewhere you didn't want to go. So very much agree with you there. the other piece is we are noticing, and I think this is already like out or was talked about, but like even Microsoft into the OS. I mean, we can talk about LinkedIn, how they enabled by default the AI setting on LinkedIn, and then 3 weeks later they let us know. Like that was interesting. The Microsoft OS is also going to be adding some of these AI settings that Senteon will be managing as well. But these are things that are consistently coming out and something we all need to stay aware on. Cool. All right. Let's hit up the next one. We got good old Internet Explorer mode tabs to completely
Well,
unending the browser session.
there's actually, and you probably went over this in some of your other groups of settings. There's a whole pile of like legacy IE mode
Yeah.
settings. They should, all of that needs to be disabled.
Yep. Senteon
Uh,
has that, and there is one setting that completely disables the access of IE.
yeah. So I mean, Internet Explorer is just, it's always been notoriously insecure from day one. And if anyone remembers the first browser wars, right, with Microsoft Internet Explorer, the biggest complaint was IE was slow. The second biggest complaint was it's totally insecure, and it really never got secure.
Yep.
Um, and in fact, they made some design decisions early on in IE that they carried through for how many versions? I don't know, like 10, 12 versions, something like that.
There's
And
plenty of versions. It just wasn't prioritized.
yeah, they did not prioritize security. So there's a bunch of dumb stuff that they did. In this case, the dumb thing is um, the session is still alive after you close the tab, which
Oh
means
god, I
you're
clicked the
leaving this.
button and download started. Close tab.
Yeah,
It's still
yeah,
gonna just go.
yeah. I mean, there is this basic concept that a web developer should be able to trust the browser when it says erase the cookie at the end of the session. As a web developer, you want to be like, okay, if the user closes the tab, I know they're logged out. If the user closes the tab, I know no one can hijack it on that like guest terminal, whatever.
Yep.
Um, and basically, if you haven't disabled this, the web developer can't trust the browser because the browser's not doing its job. The browser, when the user closes the session, the user should be able to expect, okay, I'm not in that site anymore, right? And no one can hijack that. But if you leave those remnants around, maybe they're there for seconds, or maybe through any number of circumstances that could occur, that remnant could be left behind. Someone could
Yep.
come and uncover it. This is actually not just a problem for the theoretical attack; it's also a compliance problem because there's a bunch of controls around data remnants, depending on what vertical you're in, and this would be against those compliance rules for some of those industries.
That is one piece that we haven't really touched on. And since we have a short setting episode, you're heavy on the compliance side. I know you're kind of, segmenting, differentiating from GRC, but you obviously have aspects of that in your platform. Talk to us a little bit about how technical policies, like we're literally talking about granular settings on the OS, on the browser. How does this stuff relate back to compliance?
So yeah, I'm going to just bring up a random standard, and this is not exclusive, okay? But in criminal justice, in the court system, in the legal world, we have this standard called CIS,
Okay.
and this is it's the FBI's security standard. It's actually one of the first security standards for anyone that's geeky like me about security standards. It's like a historical artifact because
Okay.
the FBI had this mainframe system, and they were giving it's like one of the first like global databases, there were movies made about this back in
That's
the
awesome.
90s about like the police having their central repository of like all the criminal data, and of course like it actually works that way now, but the FBI created this mainframe system. Police agencies that at the time just had desktop computers would dial into that system, right? Back in the 90s. And they'd be able to access and exchange data with other police forces, which is a big deal because other than that, the only thing they could do is fax, right? So
Yep.
the FBI said, well, actually, this is like sort of a security disaster. There's
They acknowledged it.
the only other security standards that existed at that time, I believe, that were widely available were for the DoD, and
Pigs,
not
probably.
not really like the concepts that that the Defense Department uses are not directly one-to-one correlation to civil, criminal justice. The DoD compartmentalizes things to death. So they invented the security standard, but at its core is tracking who's accessing data, right? That's thing one. Thing two, super important, making sure there was no remnants left behind.
Yep.
Um, so that was the history on the CIS standard. But that remnant thing's super important because any place where there's a potential data record that has to do with criminal justice, right? When the user's not using it, that's considered a remnant. And in this case, we've got this remnant, which is your session data, right? It's just left over when the user's done, right? And anyone can come along, just like someone can come along and find that that criminal justice record, right? When you're
Yep.
not using it, and then we wouldn't be able to necessarily imagine a secure investigation, right? Where someone stumbles across the
Just active
evidence.
things.
Yeah, it's an active investigation. You're supposed to keep track of who has access to the evidence. Someone else gets access to it because they didn't access the central data. They accessed the remnant. That's why the rule exists around controlling of the remnants. But in this case, we really need to care about things like this. When the user closes the tab, there needs to be some surety that the data no longer exists there because anyone could just come along and get it. And this is something attackers are doing these days is they break into a system. And I don't know if your audience understands this. Attackers break into systems through any number of means. They live off the land, which means they do not install malware. They are not detectable even by some of those anomaly detection products.
Absolutely.
Those threat hunting products do not necessarily detect living off the land attacks because there's nothing like there's no indicators of compromise that came out of a feed that happened in other places. It's just someone like living off the tools built into the system. And while
Once
they're
they
in
get
that
into a
mode,
system as well, Matt, like a lot of the times they already know the configuration of that box because they're all default most of the time, right? So
yeah,
once you're in, living off the land becomes easy because you already knew what was going to be there. So having
well,
this hardened system allows for anomalies to be better detected. I would point out as well.
they,
But please
they know
continue that.
what's there or what should be there, but they also know what might be there in the future.
Mhm.
So you can imagine how this might play out with online banking, right? The attacker breaks into the system. There's nothing particularly interesting on that computer except for some social media pictures. And, and they just hang out and they wait for that one time in 2 weeks that you log into online banking. And then, if you're leaving that residual data behind, they can then go capture that session, right?
Yep.
And go into your bank account and steal all your money, right? So, we want any time that there's potential for a data remnant that we can clean up, we should be doing that. And in this case, the major browsers already came up with a security rule, which is when you close the browser tab, the data is wiped, right?
Yep.
Which is what the developers expect.
But
So that's what
this
should be
one
happening.
setting that we're talking about, I mean, you just shared like 3 different ways this one technical policy, this one setting relates back to compliance in different ways. So
Yeah,
these settings that we talk about week after week can be part of your attestation package for meeting a control, for meeting a requirement. These things add up, right? There's 120 settings on Microsoft Edge, 100 on Chrome, and I think it's like 90 on Firefox or something. But
yeah.
there's thousands of policies across your OS, workstation, your OS, your browser, your applications. These are things that can build up your security package.
Yeah, and so that was all like the technical side, but there's
Hmm.
another side of this, which is the legal side.
Oh, there you
If
go.
there if
Defensibility and all that.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a reasonable way to do something to protect the users, and you didn't take it, that's not reasonably defensible. And that reasonably word is really important because if it's not reasonably defensible, that means you're liable in some cases for negligence.
Yeah.
Particularly if you watch the show and heard me tell you, sorry guys, heard me tell you this is an easy thing to prevent, and then this becomes a problem in the future. Well, not only should you have
Find
known
my
better,
video
but you
in
did know
court.
better.
But that's the other thing. So Matt Lee hammers this in too. You might have the best Intune engineer, the guy who's done Microsoft for 3 decades, and They read a GPO that has a double negative and their gut says, yes, this needs to be disabled, but they missed a double negative. When they attest in court, you have to prove this. Yes, we have a hardened baseline. Well, what are you doing? Oh, and how did you come to these conclusions? Oh, well, Steve from engineering told us to do so. Okay, but Steve went against this best practice standard CIS. Why did Steve make that decision? If Steve doesn't have a good answer, who's
I
liable?
I'm going to tell you what I would say on the witness stand. I would say it's not reasonable that someone's going to read all these settings and make the right choices because of things like the double negatives.
Yep.
You need to be following a pre-cooked security baseline. It's not actually possible. I mean, there's hundreds of settings in the operating system. I don't remember how many you just said in IE
500 on a
or in
workstation,
Edge.
450
Yeah,
on a server. There's so many.
it's not reasonable that people are going to make the right decisions. Any person
Yep.
could make the right decisions. Someone needs to have that. There needs to be a dictionary that someone's using.
100%. All right, let's go up to this next setting. Speaking about everyone's favorite thing, updates. So update policy override default is set to enable to always allow updates. I mean, do we have to talk about why updating your systems is important?
Well, I want to talk about a specific reality here that happens, which is particularly in service provider world. It's very frequent for us to schedule OS updates at a frequency of once a week, every couple of weeks,
Sure.
once a month, for a few different reasons. Um, because it could be disruptive, because they don't actually happen that frequently. Browser updates. First of all, drive-bys are super dangerous, right? Like instead of an OS update where you're closing a hole like behind a firewall or in an obscure place in the internet, the thing about a browser is everyone uses the web all the time. So if there's a new way
Your
to
connection to
hijack
the
a
outside world.
browser, yeah, if there's a new way to hijack a browser, which you can do via ads, right? On like Facebook, right?
Yep.
On TikTok, on LinkedIn. If there's a new way to hijack the browser and you're not patched against it, it can impact millions of people all at once.
Yep.
So it's really important. There's like a race. There's a time race when there's a new exploit in browser world. There's a time race of like you need to patch as fast as possible. And actually, I would argue the once a month that you do OS is at is not the right speed. The second thing is browser updates generally are not disruptive. Generally,
Click, you're done. Yep.
yeah, and so there's really no reason to slow this down. Besides the fact that some people end up with pending updates for months or years, and I'm sure we've all seen that, right? We don't want to allow that to happen, but really we want these to move forward as fast as they can, and if you allow the browser to patch itself, it will just happen pretty quickly.
Yeah. One thing to call out as well, you're talking about, patches, vulnerabilities, and whatnot. These CVEs, they come out pretty regularly, right? That's not an unknown thing, but unfortunately, it's very hard to keep up with these. So when you do have a hardened system and a hardened environment, yes, the CVEs are still important, but your risk of being exploited does go down. And you can argue against me if you want, but I've talked to plenty of people where, yes, having a hardened asset, having a hardened environment, when those CVEs come out, you're not as prone to or being susceptible to that being a successful CVE against you, right? So they're hardening your system really mitigates and gives you that additional time to keep up with the CVEs.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty normal that like there's not one security failure that's going to take someone down. That's unusual.
That's that logic, exactly.
It's usually that there's an attack chain, a mechanized attack chain, which might be multiple software vulnerabilities. But in addition to that, stolen credential here, lateral movement there, privilege escalation over here.
Yep.
And when you harden the system and when you do vulnerability management,
Of course, we're not saying don't do it for everyone in the audience.
Yeah. When you do both of those things together, it's exceedingly difficult for an attacker, even if they do sort of like get a toehold, to be able to take advantage of it.
Yep.
They get a toehold, and that's all it is.
Yep. Spot on. All right. And this last setting here is also along the same lines with the auto update. So this is saying, any value except for 0, because if you do set 0, I believe that means it will never actually auto update check. So it's just infinite. So CIS is not putting an explicit number here, whether that's 3 days, 7 days, or 100 days. It just says this has to be in place. So they give you a little bit of freedom to choose your own level of risk acceptance with updates.
Yeah. And browser updates these days, again, I want to
Yeah.
emphasize, not as disruptive as they used to be. I'm not going to say that there's never a disruption, but it used to be a scary thing. Don't patch because people won't be able to use XYZ business application.
Yep.
That mostly doesn't happen anymore. And if it does, if your business application is so backward that it's been floored by a browser update, I would argue there's some issues you should, the vendor, the security relationship, the vendor relationship with that piece of software is something you should investigate. Because if
Yep.
they can't keep up with browser changes that are announced like 12 months in
Chances are.
advance, yeah, chances are there's other issues there.
Yep. Spot on, brother. So that was the setting portion for today. So we could pull up the next slide here, but and we did a really good job of explaining how these do relate to that, the types of attacks that might be out there. But I just want to emphasize to the audience, like the attacks you're seeing on the screen right now, those are directly related to the things that will be mitigated if these settings are hardened. Just the 8 settings we talked about today will limit the ability for these attack techniques to be successful, right? So you don't have to do all 120 in one day, right? Senteon, of course, makes it easier with learning mode, but like there are things you can do step by step at a time to make this a successful process. So very much just want to emphasize that here. And Matt, if you do want to talk more about the attack side or educate us on some of these attack techniques, anything you wanted to add about today's episode on this respect.
I mean, if anyone's super geeky, MITRE's a fun spelunking exercise, but it is a deep one. There was a period a handful of years ago when there was no dictionary for attacks, um, and so we used all these cute names for like different ways
This
of
is
taking
before me.
advantage
I
of a
didn't know
system.
about this.
I was talking about it on our webinar, and I don't remember which examples I was using. But okay, have you heard of an evil maid attack?
No. I love it though. That's Miter should go back.
Yeah. So I mean, hey, look, they all. this is like when before attackers professionalized and asked a government think tank, "There's got to be a better way," and they came up with the dictionary, the attack dictionary, and they are able to code everything back into. Not only do they have names of all the attack methods and techniques, but they show how those relate to defensive um,
Yep.
technologies. And so you can actually, I presume that's how you got these, right? You could see exactly which settings stop which attacks.
Yeah.
And Verizon comes out with a breach report every year, which
What's
is
number
like,
2 on that one?
uh,
Configurations is number 2 on the threat report this year.
but not only that, they go deep and they're like, well, actually, these are the exact settings, and unfortunately, they change all the time.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to keep up on attacks, and by the way, this is how CIS comes up with their list because there's more settings than that. I know we talked about hundreds of settings. There's more settings than that on an OS, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But CIS puts the ones there based on, okay, this stops a specific attack that we're actually
Yep.
seeing in the wild.
Exactly. And these mappings do come from the CIS CDM community defense model. We basically leveraged that and then identified more articulately, hey, we can better attest that these are the ones that relate. So very much data. Not Senteon told you to do it. It's literally CIS told you to do it. So we're just a medium to input the things that you already want to do. Just like Matt is an attestation to where you can prove and make sure you have the right outputs in place, or rather the right inputs to get the outputs you want.
Yeah.
So very, very awesome. All right, let's go to this next slide here as we wrap up. So we talked a lot about the security side, and we actually talked a little bit about the kind of user impact, making sure we control that security culture and that behavior of distractions. But I mean, I like to list out this slide every episode. You obviously are the compliance wizard. You know a lot about this. You kind of talked about how settings relate to it. But I mean, is there a cost benefit? Is there other risks we didn't talk about? How important is this to compliance?
Well, I'm sure that this is old hat to you and your partner base, but I think every time I look at the CIS configuration security domain, They actually call it secure configurations, right?
Yep.
I This is like a lecture stump point for me to sit down with my audience and make sure they understand secure configuration does not mean that you looked at the configuration pane and click the things you thought were going to be secure. What it says is that for each of those decisions, you're choosing the correct choice based on your security baseline, and that you have some type of methodology. Automated is great because if you don't
Yep.
automate this, I don't know how you do this on hundreds of systems. To make sure that the systems are set up the way that you made that decision. So if you have 5 firewalls, are they exactly the same? If you
Yep.
have 500 systems, are they exactly the same out of the
Yep.
box? And do they stay that way? And if they drift for some reason, which could be accidental or could be an attacker letting off the land, um, do you have
How
some
do
way
you
of
know?
detecting that? And that's what
Hmm.
secure configurations is. It's not have you gone into the admin pane and clicked the things, right? It's
Doing it
how
once is not true. Like if I had an employee who I was trusting to do sales for the entire year to meet a number, I don't say, "Hey, here's your number. I'll talk to you at the end of the year to hear how you got it." Right? It's not
yeah,
secure management for a day. It's ongoing. You have to
yeah,
manage. Managing is an ongoing thing.
yeah. It's did you use due diligence in your choices for each configuration setting? Can you prove it? Can you prove that it's consistent everywhere? Can you prove that it's always that way? Right?
And
And
GP
that's
result is the best way to do it, isn't it, Matt? GP result, isn't that
don't get
the
me started on Active Directory. I'm so glad it's
yeah.
dying.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing too, and that's one of the reasons Senteon came to existence because Intune, I mean any Microsoft group policy, PowerShell, Intune, they're push only. They push and push and push. They don't actually know if their push was successful or if it was successful for 30 seconds and wasn't successful for the 2 minutes later, right? So that's the big thing. Whether you do this manually, you leverage Senteon, let you find another tool. If you do, let me know. I haven't really found anyone, but there's no way to really guarantee the state of the setting unless you go into the true source, that reg key, that sec pool, that audit pool. So you have to find a way to be able to prove this outside of Intune because Intune doesn't even know.
No, no, and there are tools, there are other tools out there, but I'm going to tell you, having experienced some of them, you need entire teams of people to run them.
Yeah.
Um, they're not they're not what you guys have built. So I'm
Yeah.
really thankful that you're in our market
Yeah.
helping
Well,
helping
we're
here.
glad to be partnered with you. But we got a few minutes left, Matt. Tell us some of the new jazz. Obviously, CompTIA had some big news the last 2 weeks, and
Oh yeah,
me and you both work with them.
I don't
Anything
want to
else going on?
speculate too
Hmm.
much, but for any of the audience that hasn't seen the press releases or the official interviews or the membership bulletins, CompTIA, which is about 40 years old, started out as a trade organization. They ran that way for a while, and then they added this like experimental thing, which was a certification program on the side to certify technicians because nothing really existed. And it grew over the last couple of decades into a monster. In fact, the current CompTIA today is a tiny little trade organization that's it's a membership organization, a
Yep.
nonprofit, right? Is sort of like attached to, and the membership organization owns it, a whale. It's like a barnacle on a whale of a training and certifications organization. CompTIA did find a buyer for that training and
Hmm.
certification organization, and I'm sure it was loud at IT Nation
Oh yeah.
because Tom Bravo, that owns ConnectWise, also owns the future of that training and certifications business. And so, what we're going to be looking at is the trade organization being able to concentrate on being that town square for the IT sector, and the training and certification business operating, its commercial imperative separately. So, and it's exciting
Yep.
because it's a disruptive shakeup, and we'll see
I mean, if they get to
what's
dedicate
coming.
all of their resources from this the community aspect. It should be exciting, right? If that truly does stay as a standalone and separate from the biases, like that'll be really exciting for
Well,
all
they're
of
going to be
us.
empowered. They're going to be empowered too
Yep.
because they've liquidated that training asset. So that's provided an asset that they're calling an endowment that is going to continue to allow them to be free from membership dues. A lot of membership organizations are beholden to marketing activities. Keep membership up, dues, dues, dues.
Yep.
And having an endowment is something that most industry associations don't benefit from. So that's
Yep. And I know
that's
me and you are both
a great win.
presently part of what is called CompTIA Trustmark. I know that name is prone to change, but you've been involved with it even longer than I am. But as far as I know, this is allowing MSPs to basically baseline themselves and prove that they're meeting some type of standard to really earn this MSP
Yeah.
title. It's not just I woke up tomorrow and now I'm an MSP. Tell us a little bit about your involvement and educate us a little bit more on what Trustmark is.
So I think the biggest problem that it's trying to solve is this fact that there's tens of thousands of service providers out there right now. Some people use numbers like
I
40,000,
think it's 40 is what I
80,000.
always hear.
It
Yeah, I don't
depends on who
know.
you ask. I've heard
Yeah.
20, 40, 80. Globally, are you including like it doesn't matter. It's many, many, many. They are not all equally capable at protecting organizations from security threats.
Yep.
The White House over the last couple of years made it like a keystone of their cyber effort. Every presidential, um, every presidency, tackles cyber and does some executive orders. And the Biden administrations over the last 4 years was, hey, our supply chain needs to be shored up. We need to like shake those service providers and make them professional and responsible for what they do. And yeah, the White House was right. Us service providers need to take ownership of the fact that we own part of the security equation. But we unlike doctors and lawyers and accountants that have hundreds of years of history and they've basically reached sort of this internal regulation professional standard. The MSP, the service provider industry, TSP, whatever you want to call them, the solution providers, IT solution providers. There's no arbiter, there's no board, there's no like professional credibility association, and so there's some cowboys out there, and some of those cowboys are delivering questionable values from a security perspective to their customers, and so that's the problem space. Um, and if we don't solve it as an industry, if service providers don't solve this, believe me, someone will solve it for us. That won't be good for the IT industry. Um, it'll be
Yep. We'll
someone's
lose
taking
control.
that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
we'll lose control. So I think that town square that is CompTIA, there's not another one like it. And I think it makes sense for us to self-regulate, and that's what the CompTIA cybersecurity trust mark's all about. Soon to be underscore cybersecurity trust mark,
Yep.
which we're
I
going to
don't know
give.
what that is. Maybe you have inside scoop. I don't, but even I don't know what it's
I,
changing to.
I'll tell you, I understand we're not going to have to wait too long. We're
Okay.
gonna know.
Good to
We're
know.
gonna we're
Announcement
gonna know
coming
very.
soon.
We're gonna know soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being a guest this week, Matt. Should have been the season closer, but IT Nation screwed things up. So one more episode coming. But Matt, absolute honor. Thank you for sharing all of your insights and educating us on these settings this week. And let's just pop up this conclusion slide, which is going to be out of date because this was not the season finale. We have one more. But you can check out these recordings on YouTube every single week. They are live there. And if you do want to check out Senteon to perform the remediation or get some of those free assessments, toss the link into your browser, let that prediction text fill it in, and you can check out where your systems currently sit with CIS and other regulatory standards. But Matt,